Part of it was desire, raw, undeniable, the kind that seeps into your skin and makes you forget reason. My marriage had grown stale, predictable. My husband loved me, but his love had become routine, ordinary. His son, on the other hand, saw me with fresh eyes. He looked at me like I was rare, irreplaceable, desired. And I fed on that. Part of it was thrill, the adrenaline of secrecy, the rush of doing something I knew I shouldn't. There's something intoxicating about forbidden fruit, about the possibility of getting caught and the danger of never being able to admit the truth. Every encounter felt like walking a tightrope over fire, and instead of fearing to fall, I craved it. And part of it, maybe the deepest part, was connection. He wasn't just my stepson, he was a young man who saw me, who listened to me, who gave me back pieces of myself I thought I'd lost. He gave me laughter, passion, attention, things my marriage had quietly stolen away over the years. Does that justify what I did? No. Nothing can. I destroyed the sanctity of trust in ways that cannot be repaired, even if no one ever finds out. Because betrayal isn't just about being caught, it's about what happens inside you. And I know, deep down, that I am guilty of the worst kind of betrayal. And yet, I don't regret all of it. That's the part that shocks even me when I admit it. I regret hurting my husband without him ever knowing. I regret the lies, the deception, the double life. But the moments I shared with his son, the fire, the passion, the reckless love, I don't regret those. They reminded me I was alive. They showed me a side of myself I thought had died long ago. In the quiet of the night, when I lie awake staring at the ceiling, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if we had been caught. If my husband had walked in, if the truth had exploded in front of us all. Would I have chosen his son over him? Would I have destroyed my marriage, my family, everything? I don't know. And I'm glad I never had to find out. Eventually, the affair burned itself out. Time has a way of changing everything. He grew older, more independent. He found new relationships, women his age. Slowly, our stolen moments became less frequent, until one day they simply stopped. We never spoke of it again. Not in words. But the memory lingers between us like smoke, a reminder of a fire that once consumed us both. Now, when I see him at family gatherings, we are polite, composed, careful. He hugs me like a stepmother, smiles like nothing ever happened. To anyone watching, we are exactly what we're supposed to be, family. But in the depths of our eyes, there's still that flicker of recognition, that unspoken history we will never share with anyone else. And maybe that's why I'm writing this now. Not to confess. Not to seek forgiveness. Not to unburden myself completely. But to tell the truth, anonymously, to someone, anyone, because the weight of silence is heavy. But here's the twisted part, the guilt only made the passion stronger. Knowing what I was risking, knowing the devastation that would follow if we were caught, only fueled the fire. It wasn't just about him anymore, it was about the secret, the lies, the thrill of walking the razor's edge and never slipping. We were careful. God, we were careful. No text messages that could be traced. No photos. No clues left behind. We planned everything with the precision of criminals, because in a way, that's what we were, partners in crime, co-conspirators in betrayal. And yet, there were close calls. One afternoon, my husband came home earlier than expected. We had been in the living room, too close, our laughter too easy. I heard the key in the door and sprang back like I'd touched fire, my heart pounding in my throat. By the time my husband stepped inside, I was standing by the kitchen counter, pretending to be scrolling through my phone, while my stepson sat innocently on the couch, flipping through TV channels. My husband never suspected a thing. That night, the adrenaline from nearly being caught drove us into each other's arms again, more desperate than ever. The danger was part of the drug, and we couldn't get enough. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if we wanted to be caught. If part of the thrill was knowing how close we were to total destruction. But the truth is, I didn't want it to end. Not yet. I knew it couldn't last forever. Secrets like ours don't stay hidden. Sooner or later, the cracks would show. But at the time, I was too far gone. Too addicted to his touch, his kiss, his presence. Too consumed by the way he made me feel, alive, wanted, burning with a passion that had long since faded from my marriage. And so, I chose to keep going. Even if it meant betraying the man who trusted me most. Even if it meant playing with fire, knowing one spark could burn everything to the ground. Because the truth was, I wasn't ready to give him up. Not yet. Not ever, if I could help it. The hardest part wasn't the guilt. It wasn't even the fear of getting caught. The hardest part was pretending that nothing had changed. By day, I was the wife, smiling across the table at my husband, listening to him complain about his work, laughing at his jokes even when I didn't find them funny. I cooked dinners, folded laundry, went through the motions of being the woman he believed I was. By night, or whenever he wasn't around, I was something else entirely. I was a secret lover, a conspirator, a woman consumed by a passion that had no place in the walls of a respectable home. My stepson and I lived in those stolen hours, carving out moments of fire in the shadows, only to step back into the light as though nothing had aged. The duality was maddening. And yet, in some twisted way, it was exhilarating. One afternoon, when my husband was at work, I was folding clothes in the bedroom when he walked in. He closed the door behind him without a word, and I didn't even bother pretending to resist. The clothes fell forgotten onto the bed as his hands were on me, his mouth devouring mine. I remember the sunlight streaming through the blinds, casting golden stripes across his bare shoulders as he pressed me against the wall. I remember the sound of my own breath, ragged and desperate, and the way his eyes burned with something wild and forbidden. When it was over, I sank onto the bed, trembling, my body still buzzing from the intensity of it all. He lay beside me, a lazy grin tugging at his lips, and I hated myself for how much I loved it. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a fling. It wasn't just lust. It was an addiction. And like any addict, I didn't care about consequences. Not then. The guilt always came later, creeping in like a shadow after the heat of the moment had faded. At night, lying next to my husband, I would study his face while he slept and feel the crushing weight of betrayal pressing down on me. How could I do this to him? To us? To the family we had built? And yet, the next time the opportunity arose, I gave in again. We developed a rhythm, unspoken but understood. When my husband was home, we were careful, just glances, smiles, stolen brushes of contact that meant nothing to anyone else but everything to us. When he was gone, the house became ours, a playground for sins neither of us admitted out loud. There was one night in particular that still burns in my memory. My husband had gone on a weekend trip, leaving me and my stepson alone for 2 days. I told myself I'd keep things under control, that I wouldn't let anything happen. But the second evening, after dinner, we ended up sitting outside on the back porch, drinking a glass of wine. The air was warm, filled with the sounds of crickets. The wine loosened my tongue, softened my resolve. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing, his frustrations with school, my struggles with loneliness when my husband worked too much. Somewhere in that conversation, I realized it wasn't just physical. He was opening himself to me in ways my husband hadn't in years. When he leaned in to kiss me, I didn't resist. By the time we stumbled back inside, the wine glass forgotten on the porch railing, I was already lost to him again. That night, something changed. It wasn't just about passion anymore, it was about connection. Dangerous, inappropriate, wrong in every sense of the word. But real. The more we gave in, the harder it became to stop. I started waking up thinking about him, falling asleep remembering the way he touched me. My husband's presence became less grounding, more suffocating. Every time he hugged me, kissed me, held me, I felt like a fraud. At family dinners, I would sit across from them both, my husband and his son, feeling the weight of the secret pressing against my chest. My husband would ask his son about his classes, his plans, his friends, completely oblivious to the fact that the boy's foot was brushing mine under the table. I would pour my husband's wine with steady hands while my stepson's gaze lingered on my lips just a second too long. It was insane. Reckless. But I couldn't stop. I became skilled at compartmentalizing, locking parts of myself away behind invisible doors. When I was with my husband, I shut it down. When I was with his son, I let it consume me. The switching back and forth made me feel like two different women, living two different lives. The secrecy was suffocating and intoxicating. I began to notice how much more alive I felt when I was with him. My marriage, by contrast, felt dull, lifeless. My husband hadn't stopped loving me, he simply stopped seeing me. The small touches, the lingering kisses, the spontaneous moments of affection, all of it had faded with time. With his son, those things were constant. He saw me. He desired me. He made me feel like I was the center of his universe. And I fed on that. But with desire came paranoia. Every laugh, every whispered word, every accidental glance risked exposure. I found myself studying my husband's face, searching for signs that he knew, that he suspected. Sometimes, when he looked at me too long, I wondered if he could see it written on my skin. One Saturday morning, I was in the kitchen making breakfast when my husband came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. It was a simple gesture, one he hadn't made in a while, but it sent panic rushing through me. Because only hours earlier, I had been in that same kitchen, in those same arms, but not his. I forced myself to smile, to lean back against him as though nothing was wrong. But inside, my heart was pounding, my mind screaming. Did he know? Could he feel it? He kissed my neck softly and said, "I don't know what I'd do without you." I nearly dropped the spatula in my hand. Guilt clawed at me, sharp and merciless. I wanted to confess everything in that moment, to purge the sin from my soul. But then I thought of the fallout, the destruction, the rage, the heartbreak, and I swallowed the words before they ever left my mouth. Later that afternoon, when my husband left to run errands, his son found me in the laundry room. One look at me, and he knew. He pressed me against the washer, his lips crashing against mine, and all that guilt I had felt earlier dissolved in an instant. That was the cycle, guilt, followed by passion, followed by more guilt. I became addicted to the pattern, unable to break free. There were times when I wondered if he felt the same conflict I did. But he was young, fearless, reckless in a way only youth can be. For him, it was adventure, conquest, maybe even love. For me, it was everything, desire, escape. I dressed a little nicer when I knew he'd be around. Not too obvious, not enough for my husband to notice, but enough that maybe he would. The guilt crept in slowly. At night, lying in bed next to my husband, I would stare at the ceiling and tell myself it was just a phase, just a passing thought, nothing more. But deep down, I knew better. One night, everything shifted. My husband had gone on a business trip, leaving me alone in the house with my stepson. It was a Saturday night, and we ordered takeout, something casual, nothing unusual. After dinner, we sat in the living room watching a movie. At some point, I realized my legs were brushing against his. It wasn't intentional, or maybe it was. I didn't move them. Neither did he. The air grew thick, charged. I could feel the heat radiating from his skin, could hear the subtle change in his breathing. My heart pounded, my palms grew damp, and for a long, unbearable moment, we just sat there in silence, pretending to watch the screen while knowing something irreversible was happening between us. I excused myself, fled to the kitchen under the pretense of grabbing more drinks. My hands trembled as I opened the fridge, as if I'd just committed a crime. And maybe I had. From that night on, I knew I was walking a razor's edge. I started to wonder if he felt the same way. Did he notice the way I looked at him? Did he sense the tension when we brushed past each other in the hallway? Did he know that sometimes, when I closed my eyes, the image of him crept into my thoughts uninvited? The guilt grew heavier, but so did the hunger. That was the beginning of the unthinkable. A seed planted in the shadows of a house that was supposed to be built on love and trust. A seed that would soon grow into something I could never take back, no matter how hard I tried. Because the truth was, even before anything physical had happened, I had already betrayed my husband. And what came next would shatter everything I thought I knew about who I was, and what I was capable of. The days after that night on the couch felt like torture. On the surface, everything was normal: breakfast at the table, casual conversations, the rhythm of a household that carried on as though nothing was happening. But underneath, the air between us was different. He looked at me longer. I lingered near him more than I should. Neither of us said anything, but silence can sometimes scream louder than words. I told myself again and again that it was just temptation, that nothing would ever actually happen. But every time I caught his eyes on me, I felt my resolve weaken. Every brush of his arm against mine sent ripples through me. Every accidental smile exchanged across the dinner table felt like a secret no one else could hear. Fulfillment, ruin. Our secrecy demanded creativity. We learned to communicate in glances, in half-smiles, in subtle touches that meant nothing to anyone else but carried entire conversations between us. At night, if my husband went to bed early, his son and I would linger in the living room, watching a movie, our bodies pressed together under the cover of a blanket, the sound of his father's snores drifting down the hallway. The danger made it irresistible. One night, we came dangerously close to exposure. My husband had fallen asleep on the couch after dinner, the TV still flickering in the background. His son and I were sitting across the room, our knees brushing under the table where we pretended to be playing a board game. The electricity between us was unbearable, and at one point, he leaned forward, his hand brushing mine. My husband stirred, shifting in his sleep, and my blood ran cold. We froze, breathless, waiting. But he never woke. When we were finally alone, hours later, the adrenaline was too much. We couldn't keep our hands off each other, and that night was one of the most intense we ever shared. The closer we came to being caught, the more reckless we became. And yet, through it all, my husband never suspected a thing. He remained blind, trusting, oblivious. He kissed me goodnight, he held my hand in public, he bragged about me to his friends. To him, I was the perfect wife. If only he knew the truth. But he never would. Not if I could help it. Because as much as I sometimes longed to confess, as much as I hated the deception, I couldn't bring myself to destroy him or us. And, selfishly, I couldn't bring myself to let go of what I had with his son. Living two lives was dangerous. It was exhausting. But it was also exhilarating. And until the day came when it all fell apart, I was willing to keep walking that razor's edge. Because the alternative, giving him up, was unthinkable. When people talk about affairs, they usually talk about discovery. The screaming, the tears, the breaking apart of families when secrets come into the light. But my story doesn't have that ending. I was never caught. To this day, my husband doesn't know. He looks at me with the same trust he always has, unaware of the fire I fed behind his back. He holds me at night, oblivious to the fact that there were years when his son's hands were the ones that traced my skin in the dark. He believes I am loyal, faithful, his partner in everything. And maybe that's the cruelest part of it all. I betrayed him in a way that can never be undone. I betrayed him with his own son. And yet, he will never know. The secret will die with me, sealed behind the smile of the wife he thinks he knows. People always ask, why? Why risk everything? Why choose something so forbidden, so destructive, so wrong? I've asked myself that question more times than I can count. I had crossed the line. There was no undoing it. The days that followed were a blur of secrecy. We acted normal in front of my husband, the picture of a blended family. But every stolen glance, every accidental brush of skin, carried the weight of what we had done. The tension grew unbearable, a silent, pulsing hunger that neither of us could ignore. It wasn't long before it happened again. And again. The first time had been a mistake, an accident, or at least that's what I told myself. But the second time was deliberate. Planned. One evening, when my husband left for another late shift, I found myself waiting, almost anticipating. My stepson came into the living room, and without a word, we both knew what was going to happen. The moment our eyes met, the dam broke, and we were in each other's arms again, hungrier than before. This time, there was no hesitation. No whispered apologies. Just raw, unrestrained passion that consumed us both. Afterward, as we lay tangled together in the quiet aftermath, the guilt hit me harder than ever. What kind of woman was I? What kind of wife? What kind of stepmother? And yet, even as the questions tore through me, one truth remained: I couldn't stop. I had tasted the forbidden, and it had awakened something in me that couldn't be silenced. The first crossing of boundaries had been a mistake. But what came after was no mistake at all, it was a choice. A choice I made again and again, knowing full well the cost if we were ever discovered. But at the time, I didn't care. All I cared about was the way he made me feel, alive, desired, reckless in a way I hadn't felt in years. And so the affair began. Secret. Hidden. Unforgivable. And completely unstoppable. After that second night, there was no going back. Whatever line we had crossed was now behind us, fading into the distance like a road we could never return to. What began as a dangerous kiss in the kitchen had become something darker, heavier, addictive. I would love to tell you I fought harder against it. That I resisted, that I drew the line again and swore never to cross it. But the truth? I didn't. The truth is, I wanted it. I wanted him. Every stolen moment became a drug, and I was hooked. It started small: brushed hands when no one was looking, stolen kisses in dark corners of the house, whispered conversations when my husband's back was turned. But soon, small wasn't enough. The hunger grew. The secrecy made it hotter, the danger more thrilling. Knowing my husband was often just a phone call away, or that he could walk through the door at any moment, sent my heart racing in ways that had nothing to do with fear. I found myself inventing excuses just to be near him. Trips to the grocery store that I didn't really need. Late-night movies on the couch. Offering to help with his laundry. Innocent tasks cloaking intentions that were anything but. He was always there, always willing, always hungry for me. The line was already blurred. It was only a matter of time before it vanished altogether. The moment came on another night when my husband was gone. He had taken another late shift, something he did often enough that it no longer felt unusual. I was in the kitchen, leaning over the counter scrolling through my phone when I heard footsteps behind me. "Smells good in here," he said casually, his voice deep and close enough that I felt his breath against my shoulder. I froze. It wasn't just the words, it was the way he said them, the weight behind them. "Just reheating leftovers," I replied, forcing my voice to stay steady. He didn't move away. Instead, he leaned against the counter beside me, so close that our arms brushed. I could feel the heat of him, the energy radiating off his body. I tried to step away, but he shifted, blocking me subtly, not aggressively, but with a kind of unspoken daring. Our eyes met. And in that instant, something inside me snapped. It started with a kiss. Sudden, desperate, and reckless. I don't even remember who leaned in first, maybe we both did. His lips were on mine, and every warning, every rule, every ounce of guilt disappeared in a flood of heat. I should have pulled away. I should have slapped him, screamed, run, anything but what I did. Instead, I kissed him back. The taste of him was intoxicating, young and hungry, filled with all the things I had secretly craved but never admitted. My hands clutched his shirt, pulling him closer, while his fingers tangled in my hair. The world outside that kitchen ceased to exist, there was only him, only us, and the forbidden fire we had just unleashed. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were breathless. "We can't," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I know," he said, his eyes burning into mine. "But I don't want to stop." Neither did I. That night, the kitchen became the scene of my first betrayal. It wasn't planned, it wasn't graceful, it was raw, messy, and unstoppable. He kissed me again, harder this time, and I gave in completely. My back hit the counter, and my body betrayed me by craving him with a desperation I hadn't felt in years. Every touch, every kiss, every gasp was wrong. But it felt so achingly right. When it was over, when the storm finally passed, we stood there in stunned silence, both of us trembling, both of us fully aware of what we had just done. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though the words felt hollow. He shook his head. "Don't be." But I was. God, I was. And yet, beneath the guilt, a dangerous truth lingered: I wanted more. That night, lying in bed beside my husband, I stared at the ceiling in silence. My body still remembered the way his son's hands had felt on me, the way his lips had moved against mine. I closed my eyes, ashamed, and yet the memory replayed over and over, as vivid as fire. I never thought I would be the kind of woman who would end up telling a story like this. My name doesn't matter, and even if it did, I would never put it here. What matters is what I did, the shocking, unthinkable thing that even now still feels like it belongs to someone else's life. But it was mine. I lived it. I breathed it. I sinned in it. And I betrayed my husband in the most unforgivable way possible, with his own son. When I first married my husband, I knew he had a teenage boy from his first marriage. My stepson was polite, withdrawn, a little awkward in the way young men can be when they're still figuring themselves out. I remember the first time I met him at a small restaurant where his father had arranged a dinner for us to all sit down together. He barely looked at me, barely said more than a hi. I thought nothing of it. To me, he was just a boy. My role, I thought, would be limited, stepmother from a polite distance. Years passed, and the boy grew. I watched him transform in subtle ways: his shoulders broadened, his jawline sharpened, his voice deepened. He began to carry himself differently, with more confidence. By the time he was in his late teens, he wasn't that shy, withdrawn kid anymore. He was a man. And that was when the danger began. At first, it was just small things I noticed: his eyes lingering on me longer than they should have, the way his laugh seemed different when I was the one who made the joke, the almost imperceptible shift in the air whenever we were alone in the same room. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself I was a married woman, and he was my husband's son, off limits in every possible way. But the human mind has a way of playing tricks when temptation is involved. I started to notice more. The way his shirt would cling to his chest after he came back from the gym. The faint smell of his cologne that lingered in the hallway after he passed by. The sound of his voice when he said my name, deeper now, huskier, tinged with something that made my stomach twist with a sensation I didn't want to name. I should have stopped it there. I should have built a wall so high nothing could break through it. Instead, I did the opposite: I fed it. It began innocently, or so I told myself. One evening, my husband was working late, and I was in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner. My stepson walked in, shirtless, sweat glistening on his skin from his workout. He grabbed a bottle of water and leaned against the counter, chatting casually about his day. I laughed at something he said, and when my eyes met his, I felt it, that spark, that dangerous electricity that I knew I had no business feeling. From that moment on, it was like a door had been unlocked inside me. I started paying closer attention to him. I'd glance at him when he wasn't looking, watching how he moved, how effortlessly youth clung to him. I found excuses to talk to him, to linger in conversation longer than necessary. This is my story, my secret. A secret I will carry to my grave. My husband will never know. My friends will never know. The world will never know, except for these words, hidden behind anonymity, floating in a space where no one can point a finger at me. Some nights, I lie awake and wonder if he, my stepson, remembers it the way I do. If he ever thinks about me the way I sometimes still think about him. If the fire we shared still lingers in his memory, or if he has buried it completely, moving on with a life that has nothing to do with me. I will never ask. Because to ask is to reopen the door, and I cannot afford to step through it again. So here I am, a woman who lived two lives. The wife. The lover. The betrayer. This is my confession. Not to my husband, not to my family, not to him, but to you, the one reading these words. Because secrets like mine are too heavy to carry alone. And yet, they remain secrets all the same. Unseen. Unspoken. Untouchable. I betrayed my husband with his son. And he will never know. That is the shocking truth of my life. And now you know it too. Disclaimer. This story is a fictionalized narrative created for mature audiences only. It is intended for entertainment and storytelling purposes and does not promote, encourage, or glorify infidelity, betrayal, or inappropriate relationships. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. Viewer discretion is advised. If this story left you speechless, you're not alone. The truth about infidelity is that it rarely looks the way we expect. Sometimes, the most shocking secrets are the ones that never come out. Stay tuned for more real-life confessions and forbidden tales like this. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, and share so you never miss the next story. Because every secret has a story, and every story deserves to be told.